Okay, guys, in class last week, you started to look at decimals and we started talking about place value. Before we started talking about place value, we discussed what a decimal is and that a decimal helps us to separate the whole number from the part of the whole. So this number 4 and 54 hundredths tells us basically we have 4 wholes and we have 54 hundredths of a whole. So in this space here under the value, we can say that this 4 represents 4 wholes or 4 ones. We also said that we would use this hundredths block as our one whole to represent one whole. So if I had 4 of these, I can also say that it would take 40 of these tenths blocks to equal the same thing. So this 4 has a value of 4 wholes, but it also has a value of 40 tenths. And these 4 wholes, if we were looking at these hundredths piece, each whole would have 100 of these. So 4 wholes is the same as 400 hundredths. This 5 is in the tenths place. Remember, the tenths place means that it is 10 times smaller than the ones place. So this 5 has a value of 5 tenths. It also has a value of 50 hundredths. And this 4 here has a value of 4 hundredths. And we are not going to write it, but it also has a value of 40 thousandths and 410 thousandths. Okay. And when we draw, we can just represent the hundredths grids with a square, and we can represent our tenths with a line, and let's represent our hundredths with little squares. In the compare box, we are going to look at our digit and we're going to multiply it by its place value. That's going to help us to compare the digits that are the same in just a second. So 4 times 1, because the digit of 4 is in the ones place, and then this one would be 5 times 1/10, because the 5 is in the tenths place, and this box would be 4 times 100th, because the 4 is in the hundredths place. Since we would be comparing the digits that are the same, we would be comparing the 4s. And we can see that it would take 2 jumps, or they are 2 jumps apart, meaning that they are 100 times greater or less. So we can say that the 4 in the ones place is 100 times greater than the 4 in the hundredths place. We can also say that the opposite and say the 4 in the hundredths place is 100 times smaller than the 4 in the ones place. Or we can just say that 4 is 100 times greater than 4 hundredths. And in order to shade this in, I did make a mistake and I didn't put enough grids on here. So you would want to shade in 4 entire blocks, and then in the last box, so we'll pretend that we shaded in 4. If you need to make a note on here that there should be one more hole, please do so. And then once we've shaded in the 4 entire hundredths grids to represent our 4 holes, we need to then shade in 5 tenths. So there's 1/10, 2, 3, 4, 5 tenths, and then 4 hundredths. So we've represented this 4 and 54 hundredths with a drawing. We've talked about the values, we've compared the digits that are the same, and we've also represented it in a picture. On the other side, we have a number that goes out into the thousands place. So we have the number 1 and 416 thousandths. And again, when we talk about the value, we have the 1 representing 1 1. It also has a value of 10 tenths, 100 hundredths, and 1,000 thousandths. I'm going to go ahead and abbreviate that one. And the 4 has a value of 4 tenths, 40 hundredths, or 400 thousandths. This one has a value of 1 hundredth and 10 thousandths. And again, we could actually go out further and say that it's 100 10 thousandths, but we're not going to worry about past the thousandths place for this. And then the 6 is the same as 6 thousandths. I can draw this by showing 1 whole, 4 tenths, 1 hundredth, and then we can represent our thousandths with these little dashes. 5, 6. And again, in the compare box, we're going to worry about the digit and multiply it by its place value. So we have a 1 in the ones place, so it's 1 times 1. We have a 4 in the tenths place, so it's 4 times 1 tenth. A 1 in the hundredths place, so it's 4 times 1 100th. And a 6 in the thousandths place, so it's 6 times 1 1,000. And the two digits that are the same that we would be comparing are the ones. And again, they are 2 jumps away, telling us that they are 100 times greater or less than the other. So just like we always do, we can say that the 1 is 100 times, the 1 in the ones place is 100 times greater than the 1 in the hundredths place, or the 1 in the hundredths place is 100 times smaller than the 1 in the ones place, or we can write that 1 is 100 times greater than 100th. You could also say that 100th is 1 100th of 1 whole. So we could write that many ways just to represent it. And then the last thing that we need to do is go ahead and shade in. And we're going to shade in 1 whole. And especially when we are working with a thousandths grid, it's the same size shape. The hundredths are still on there. All we did was break up the 100 into 10 parts to represent 1,000. So we have 1 whole. We need 4 1/10ths. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. And even though those pieces are in there, we can still see that there's 1/10, there's 2/10, 3/10, 4/10. We need to shade in 1 hundredths piece, which is just one of those little squares. And then we need to shade in 6 thousandths. And each of the thousandths are these little teeny tiny ones inside the hundredths. And there's 5,